I woke up on Thanksgiving expecting the warmth of family, but instead, I found a cold, heavy silence that screamed betrayal. My son and his wife didn't just leave. They left me with a frozen dinner and a stolen credit card, assuming I was too old to fight back. They didn't realize that while they were flying to paradise, I was already dismantling their entire existence. They were wrong. Before I tell you how I dismantled their lives piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke up to a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. For 40 years, this house had smelled of roasting turkey, sage stuffing, and brewing coffee by this hour, a tradition my late wife Elizabeth had started at dawn. But today, the air was stale, smelling only of dust and old floor wax. There was no sound of children running down the hallway, no clattering of pans in the kitchen. I walked into the guest wing where my son Derek and his wife Vanessa stayed, only to find stripped beds and empty closets. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach until I reached the kitchen and found the granite countertops bare. There was no chef, no food prep, just a frozen dinner in the freezer and a single neon yellow post-it note stuck to the stainless steel refrigerator. I pulled it off and read Derek's scribbled handwriting. "Dad, we decided to go to Hawaii last minute. The flight deals were too good to pass up. We couldn't get a ticket for you on such short notice. And honestly, we figured the travel would be too hard on your hips anyway. We will see you next week." I did not cry. Instead, I felt a sudden, sharp clarity that turned my sadness into a cold, calculated rage. They used my hips as a convenient lie to cover their selfishness. I walked into my office to witness the exit on the security system. I rewound the footage to 4 a.m. and watched the black and white truth. Derek was dragging massive suitcases while Vanessa herded the sleep-drunk children with the guilty stealth of thieves. I turned up the volume, and the high-quality microphones picked up their whispers. "Hurry up, Derek," Vanessa hissed, adjusting her designer sunglasses indoors. "If he wakes up, we are never going to get out of here. I cannot deal with another week of his stories." Derek chuckled, struggling with a golf bag. "He is deaf in one ear. Vanessa. He will sleep through it." Then came the line that killed the last shred of softness in my heart. As they stood on the porch, Vanessa checked her reflection in the window and sneered, "God, I am so glad we are leaving. That house smells like old people and failure." My house was a $3 million estate, and that smell was the mahogany and leather I had paid for. I sat behind my heavy oak desk, the command center of my life as a CEO, and opened my laptop. If they had booked a last-minute trip for 6 people, it cost a fortune, yet Derek constantly complained about his salary. I logged into my banking portal and checked the tab for my emergency black Amex, a card hidden in a safe known only to me. There it was, a pending transaction timestamped 5 hours ago for the Four Seasons Resort Maui. Amount, $45. Ling ling ling. They hadn't just abandoned me, they had financed their betrayal with my own money, stealing the card reserved for life or death situations to book a penthouse suite. This was not just a lack of love, this was grand larceny. My hand was steady as I picked up the phone and dialed the one man I could trust. Mac answered on the second ring, his gravelly voice cutting through the silence. "Arnold, it is Thanksgiving morning. The house better be on fire." I looked at the frozen lasagna on my desk and the notification for the stolen 45 grand. "It is not on fire, Mac," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "But I have a security breach. I need you here in 30 minutes. Mac paused, hearing the seriousness in my tone. "Is it the alarm system?" he asked. "No," I replied. "I need a total lockdown. I want every lock on the perimeter changed, the gate code scrubbed, and the windows secured. And Mac, bring your truck. I have a lot of debris that needs to be removed from the second floor." Mac knew exactly who lived on the second floor. "Are you sure about this, Arnold? Once we turn those bolts, there is no going back." I replied, "I have never been more sure of anything. Bring the heavy-duty drills. Mac, we are scrubbing the facility." I hung up the phone with Mac and stood by the window for a moment, watching the sun fully rise over the manicured lawn where my grandchildren used to play. It was a landscape that had once brought me joy. But now, in the cold light of this Thanksgiving morning, it looked less like a playground and more like a battlefield awaiting the first volley. I had work to do before Mac arrived, a preliminary purge to prepare the site. I walked up the stairs to the second floor, the guest wing that Derek and Vanessa had slowly, insidiously turned into their permanent residence over the last 5 years. They called it staying for a while to help me, a phrase that had initially sounded like comfort, but I now realize was nothing more than an occupation. I opened the door to their master suite, and the room was a disaster of entitlement. Clothes were strewn everywhere, jewelry boxes were left open, and the air smelled cloyingly of Vanessa's expensive perfume, mixed with the stale, musty scent of Derek's incompetence. I grabbed a roll of heavy-duty black contractor bags from the closet and started with Vanessa's vanity. I swept her creams, her lotions, and her hundreds of dollars of designer makeup into the bag with a violent, sweeping motion of my arm. I did not organize it. I did not check for breakables. I treated her possessions exactly as she had treated my dignity, like garbage. I moved to the walk-in closet and pulled Derek's suits off the hangers. These were the very suits I had bought him for his interviews. The suits he wore to the office where he did nothing but pretend to work while waiting for me to die. I stuffed them into the bags with mechanical efficiency. My heart rate elevated not from stress, but from a surge of adrenaline I hadn't felt in years. It was the energy of a man finally taking control. By the time the doorbell rang, I had 12 bags lined up at the top of the stairs, a black plastic barricade. I went down to open the front door and found Max standing there, holding a cordless drill like a weapon and a tool belt slung over his shoulder. He looked at me, then passed me at the pile of black bags visible on the landing. He didn't ask any questions. He simply nodded, his eyes hardening. "Where do you want to start, Arnold?" he asked. "Start with the front door," I said, pointing to the brass hardware. "I want a biometric lock. Fingerprint only." "My fingerprint only?" Mac immediately moved to disable the keypad. "I do not want them guessing the code," I added. As Mac got to work, the sound of the drill biting into the wood was the most satisfying sound I had heard all morning. It was the sound of boundaries being drawn and authority being reclaimed. While Mac worked on securing the perimeter, I returned to the second floor to finish the job. I had cleared the surfaces, but now I needed to check the hiding spots. Vanessa was a hoarder of secrets, and Derek was a man who lived in the shadows of his own lies. I knelt by the bed and noticed the heavy Persian rug, an heirloom from Elizabeth's family, was slightly askew. I dragged the heavy wool carpet away and saw it, a loose floorboard near the wall, pried up slightly as if it had been disturbed recently. I used the tip of my cane to nudge the wood, and it moved easily. Beneath the floor, tucked into the insulation, was an orange Nike shoebox. I pulled it out. It was heavy, and it rattled. I sat back on my heels, the box on my lap, a cold, sinking feeling in my gut telling me I had only scratched the surface of their betrayal. I lifted the lid, and the air left the room. Inside, there were no sneakers. There was only paper. A chaotic, crumpled nest of thermal receipts and carbon copy slips. I pulled out the stack and began to read. My hands trembled as the reality of what I was holding washed over me. The first receipt was from a place called Quick Cash Pawn, dated 3 months ago. Item description: diamond tennis bracelet, 3 carats. Loan amount, $1. Lounby. My breath hitched. That was Elizabeth's bracelet. I had given it to Vanessa on her wedding day as a gesture of welcoming her into the family, a symbol of trust. She had pawned it for a fraction of its value. I dug deeper. Another receipt. Item description: vintage Rolex men's gold. Loan amount, $1. Ube. That was my retirement watch, the one I thought I had lost 2 years ago. I remembered tearing the house apart looking for it. Derek had helped me look. He had patted my back and said, "You probably left it at the club, Dad. Your memory isn't what it used to be." He had gaslighted me. lying to my face while the pawn ticket was sitting under his floorboard. Then I found the receipt that broke me. It was dated yesterday. Item description: men's gold wedding band. Inscribed Forever A and E. Loan amount $300. My vision blurred. I couldn't breathe. That was my wedding ring. I had taken it off 6 months ago because my fingers had swollen from arthritis. I had placed it in the small velvet box on my dresser, intending to get it resized. I stood up, scraping the chair violently against the floor, and limped as fast as I could to the wall safe hidden behind Elizabeth's portrait in my study. My hands were shaking so badly I missed the combination twice. Finally, the tumbler clicked. I swung the heavy steel door open. Inside, the velvet boxes were stacked neatly. It looked orderly. It looked safe. I grabbed the small square blue box where my wedding ring should have been. I opened it. It wasn't empty. Resting on the white satin cushion was a ring, but it wasn't my heavy gold band. It was a cheap, gold-plated washer, a piece of hardware store junk. They had swapped it. They hadn't just stolen it. They had replaced it with a decoy so that if I glanced inside, I wouldn't notice immediately. It was a calculated, malicious deception. Derek had looked at his father's wedding ring, the symbol of the marriage that created him, and decided it was worth $300 of spending money for a vacation. I collapsed onto the floor of my study, clutching the cheap washer in my hand. A guttural sound escaped my throat, a sound halfway between a sob and a growl. For 10 years, I had mourned Elizabeth. I had kept this house as a museum to our life together. I had allowed Derek and Vanessa to live here because I thought it would keep her memory alive. But they were not family. They were parasites. They were termites eating away the foundation of my life while smiling at me across the dinner table. The sadness began to evaporate, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I was no longer the grieving widower. I was no longer the lonely old man grateful for scraps of attention. I was Arnold Sterling, and I had just found the ammunition I needed to go to war. I stood up, holding the box of receipts, and walked out to the landing, where Mac was now changing the lock on the master suite door. "Mac," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Change of plans. Do not just put the bags in the garage. Call your guys. Call the junk haulers. I want everything gone." Mac paused, looking at the box in my hands and the look in my eyes. "Everything?" he asked. "Everything," I confirmed. "The furniture, the clothes, the toys, the electronics. If it is in this wing, it goes. I want this floor bare down to the subfloor." Mac nodded slowly. "Consider it done, boss." I walked downstairs to my office and placed the box of pawn receipts on my desk next to the frozen lasagna. I took out my phone. It was time to make the first call. Not to Derek. Not yet. I called the fraud department of American Express. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling." The representative answered cheerfully. "Happy Thanksgiving. How can I help you?" "I need to report a theft," I said, my voice steady. "My emergency card has been stolen." "Oh, I am so sorry to hear that," the representative said. "We show a large transaction pending in Maui." "Was that you?" "That was not me," I said. "That was unauthorized use. I want you to flag it as fraud. I want you to cancel the card immediately. And I want you to contact the resort and inform them that the payment method is invalid and stolen." "Sir," the representative warned, "if we do that, the hotel will likely lock the guests out of the room and involve the police. It could be a very difficult situation for whoever is using the card." I looked at the pawn receipt for my wife's bracelet. I thought about Vanessa's voice, calling my home a place of failure. That is exactly what I'm counting on. I said, "Do it." I hung up the phone. The first domino had been pushed. Now I just had to wait for the crash. I sat there in the suffocating silence of my study, the only sound the distant, rhythmic whirring of Mac's drill upstairs as he finished securing the perimeter of what was rapidly becoming a fortress. I pulled the yellow post-it note from my pocket. the one that had been stuck to the refrigerator like a slap in the face, and smoothed it out on the mahogany desk next to the pile of incriminating pawn receipts. "Happy Thanksgiving," I whispered to the empty room, my voice dripping with a bitter, cold irony that tasted like ash. Then, as if on qui, my phone rang. The screen lit up, vibrating against the wood. It was Derek. The caller ID showed a picture of him smiling at his college graduation, a picture I had taken with such swelling pride 20 years ago. I stared at it, but the face I saw now wasn't my son. It was the face of a stranger who had swapped my wedding ring for a washer. I let it ring 3 times. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to wonder why his old, supposedly senile father wasn't picking up immediately to reassure him. I swiped the green button and put the phone to my ear. I said nothing. I just listened to the background noise of the airport wind, the tropical announcements, and the faint sound of ukulele music. "Dad." Derek's voice came through, breezy and fake, saturated with a synthetic cheerfulness that made my stomach turn. "Hey, did you get our note? I tried to call earlier, but the signal was bad. We just landed. It is absolute paradise here." I leaned back in my leather chair, staring up at the ceiling where the shadows were lengthening. "I got the note, Derek," I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. It was the voice I used to use in boardrooms before I dismantled a competitor. Frozen lasagna. Very thoughtful. Derek laughed, a nervous, dismissive sound that grated against my ear like sandpaper. "Yeah, sorry about that. It was just such a spur-of-the-moment thing. Vanessa really needed a break. You know how stressed she gets with the kids in the holidays." "I know," I said, my hand closing around the cheap gold-plated washer I had retrieved from the safe. "It must be very stressful pawning your mother-in-law's jewelry. That kind of work takes a toll on a person." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. The ukulele music seemed to stop. The tropical breeze faded into the static of a dead connection. "What?" Derek stammered, his voice dropping an octave. "What did you say?" "I found the box, Derek," I said, picking up the receipt for the sapphire brooch and reading the details into the receiver. "I found the orange Nike box under the floorboard in your bedroom. The bracelet, my Rolex, the family silver. I have the receipts from the pawn shop on 4th Street. Dad, wait. I can explain." Derek's voice pitched up, panic setting in, the breezy confidence evaporating instantly. "We didn't sell them. We borrowed against them. It's a temporary arrangement. I have a bonus coming in January. I was going to get them all back before you even noticed. It was just a liquidity issue." "A liquidity issue?" I repeated, the business term sounding obscene in this context. "Is that what you call stealing from your father to pay for a vacation you cannot afford? You pawned your mother's legacy for liquidity?" "It's not stealing," Derek shouted, his entitlement flaring up to mask his fear. "It's family assets. I am your only son. It's all going to be mine eventually anyway. We just advanced the inheritance a little bit." And there it was. The naked truth. He didn't see me as a person. He saw me as a bank account with a pulse, a waiting room for his inheritance. "Not anymore," I said. "Dad, listen to me," Derek pleaded, the background noise of his children crying now audible. "We can talk about this when I get back. We just landed. The kids are excited to get to the hotel. Let's just have a nice week." I cut him off, my voice sharp as a blade. "There is no nice week. Derek, I just got off the phone with American Express. I reported the card as stolen." "What?" Derek screamed, the sound distorting the speaker. "Dad, no. We used that card for the reservation. We used it for the rental car. If you cancel it, they'll decline us at check-in." "I know," I said. "I hope you brought cash." "Dad, you can't do this. We don't have any other cards with that limit. We are in Hawaii. We have the kids. You can't strand us here. You should have thought about that before you stole $45,000 from me." I said. You should have thought about that before you called my house a place of failure. You heard that? Derek whispered, his voice trembling. I heard everything, I said. Enjoy the frozen lasagna. I hung up the phone. I didn't just press the red button. I turned the phone completely off and placed it face down on the desk. The silence in the house was absolute again, but now it felt different. It was the silence of a strategy being executed, the calm before the artillery barrage. I stood up and walked to the wall safe, hidden behind the portrait of Elizabeth. I spun the dial and opened the heavy steel door. Inside were the deeds, the trust documents, and the corporate charters. I pulled out the blue folder marked the Elizabeth Sterling Trust. This was the nuclear option. This was the document I had hoped never to use. The house did not belong to me personally. It belonged to the trust Elizabeth had set up before she died. She had been worried about Derek's lack of ambition and insisted on a specific provision, Clause 12. If the beneficiary demonstrates gross negligence, moral turpitude, or hostility toward the trustee shall have the power to liquidate the assets and redirect the proceeds to a charitable organization. I was the trustee, Derek was the beneficiary, and he had just demonstrated all three conditions in a single morning. I took the folder to my desk, the heavy paper feeling like a weapon in my hands. I picked up my landline and dialed a number I knew by heart. Walter, I said when the voice answered. Arnold, it's Thanksgiving. Are you calling to wish me well? Walter Harrison asked. He was my corporate attorney and my oldest friend, a man who had seen me through 3 mergers and a recession. No, I said, I am calling to activate Clause 12. There was a long pause on the line. Walter knew exactly what that meant. Are you sure? He asked, his voice serious. That is the scorched earth protocol. Arnold, that means selling the house. That means cutting Derek off completely from the estate. I am sure, I said. I want the house listed, but not on the open market. I don't want signs in open houses. Call the investors. Call the we buy ugly houses people. Call the cash buyers. I want it sold in 48 hours. Arnold, you will get pennies on the dollar if you sell that fast. Walter warned. That estate is appraised at 1.5 million. A cash buyer like Carter will offer you 850. Null tops. You're throwing away equity. I do not care about the price, I said, my voice rising with intensity. I care about the speed. I want the title transferred before they get on a plane back from Hawaii. I want them to come home to a house they do not own. Understood, Walter said, his tone shifting to professional steel. I will make the calls. I will have the paperwork ready for you to sign tomorrow morning. The meeting with Carter took place at 8 a.m. on Friday. The day after Thanksgiving, Carter was a shark in a shiny suit, a real estate investor who smelled blood in the water from miles away. He walked through my foyer, his eyes scanning the marble floors and the crystal chandelier, calculating his profit margin with every step. I did not offer him coffee. I did not offer him a tour. The house was empty now, in the junk crew having stripped the second floor down to the bare walls the night before. Nice bones, Carter said, running a hand over the mahogany banister, his voice slick with false sympathy. But the market is soft. Mr. Sterling, interest rates are up. Inventory is sitting. To move a property of this size in 48 hours, cash only, no inspections, well, that is a tall order. He was playing the game. He was trying to devalue the asset to see how desperate I was. He thought I was in financial ruin. He had no idea that I was simply buying the most expensive eviction notice in history. Cut the theater, Carter, I said, leaning on my cane and staring him down. This house appraises for 1.5 million. The roof is slate and less than 5 years old. The HVAC is industrial grade. You know exactly what this is worth. Give me the number. Carter stopped pacing. He looked at me. Then he looked at the empty living room where the Persian rug used to lie. Babai Wusher, ling ling ling, he said. Cash wire transfer hits your account Monday morning when the title clears. Closing costs on you. I did not flinch. Bye-bye wushimiyan. Ling ling ling. That was a loss of $650. 0 inches equity. That was enough money to put 4 grandchildren through college. That was enough money to buy a small island. He was robbing me blind, and he knew it. He waited for me to argue. He waited for me to counter at $1 million. Done, I said. Carter blinked. He actually took a step back, surprised by the lack of resistance. Just like that? He asked, suspicion clouding his eyes. Why? What is wrong with the foundation? Is there mold behind the drywall? There is nothing wrong with the house, I said, my voice cold and flat. The structure is sound. The rot was in the occupants. I accept your offer on one condition. He narrowed his eyes. What condition? I want a 30-day lease back. I said, the title transfers Monday. The money transfers Monday. But I retain legal possession and the keys for 30 days. I want it in writing that no one enters this property without my express permission until that 30 days is up. Especially not the previous occupants. Carter shrugged. A leaseback is standard. We can do that. But seriously, Mr. Sterling, why are you torching 600 grand in equity just to close by Monday? I looked at the spot on the wall where the family portrait used to hang, the empty space staring back at me. I am not selling a house. Carter, I said, I am buying a lesson, and tuition is expensive. He pulled the contract out of his briefcase. It was a standard investor purchase agreement, simplified for speed. I took his pen. I did not hesitate. I signed my name, Arnold Sterling, on the line. The ink was black and permanent. With that signature, I had legally severed the last physical tie to my son. When he returned from Hawaii, he would not be coming home. He would be trespassing on corporate property. Carter countersigned and handed me the yellow copy. Pleasure doing business with you, he said, though he looked unsettled by the coldness of the transaction. Monday morning, I said, do not be late with the wire. I walked him to the door and locked it behind him. The house was sold. The clock was ticking. Now I just had to wait for the plane to land. The flight from Honolulu to New York is 10 hours of confinement that can break even the strongest spirits. For my son and his family, it was a purgatory of economy seating, crying children, and the gnawing hunger of people who had spent their last dollars on a taxi to the airport. I did not need to be in Hawaii to witness the destruction of their vacation. I watched it unfold from the comfort of my leather armchair in a hotel suite in Connecticut, illuminated by the soft blue glow of my laptop screen. The digital trail told the story more vividly than any video feed. The first notification had arrived days ago, an automated email from American Express confirming the card was declined at the Four Seasons. Then came the barrage of desperate texts from Derek, begging for a transfer, claiming they were stuck at a Motel 6 near the airport because the resort had evicted them. He had asked for $500. I had sent a reply telling him to enjoy the peanut butter and jelly because it builds character, then blocked his number. They were stranded in paradise, but they were living in hell. They landed at JFK in the gray, pre-dawn light of a Tuesday morning. The weather had turned violently. The crisp autumn air of Thanksgiving had curdled into a wet, freezing mix of rain and snow that coated the tarmac in slush. I had set a notification alert for motion at the front gate of the estate, and when the ping sounded at 10 a.m., I set down my coffee and leaned forward. The final act was beginning. A black Uber Suburban pulled up to the curb, but it did not pull into the driveway because Mac had scrubbed the gate codes. The keypad was now unresponsive to their old combination. The driver, likely annoyed by the delay and the lack of a tip, idled for a moment before the back doors flew open. Derek stepped out first. He was wearing cargo shorts and a thin linen shirt, an outfit designed for the trade winds of Maui, not the biting 30-degree sleet of Connecticut. He looked haggard. His skin was peeling from a sunburn he hadn't protected, and he shivered violently as the wind hit him, his body curling inward instinctively. He didn't look like a successful executive returning to his estate. He looked like a castaway washed up on a hostile shore. Vanessa followed him, struggling with the youngest child, who was wailing in that exhausted, high-pitched tone that grates on the nerves. She wore a sarong and sandals, her toes already turning pink from the cold. She shouted something at Derek, her breath pluming in the frigid air. Even without audio, I knew the cadence of her complaints. She was blaming him for the weather, for the gate, for the misery of their existence. They unloaded the luggage, the same massive suitcases Derek had snuck out with 5 days ago, laughing at my expense. Now they looked like millstones around his neck. The Uber drove away, splashing dirty slush onto Derek's legs. He kicked the tire of the departing car in a futile gesture of rage, then regained his balance and trudged toward the pedestrian gate. I switched camera views to the front porch feed. This was the view I had sacrificed $650, 0 inches equity to see. They walked up the long driveway, a pathetic caravan of shivering tourists. The children, including my grandson Toby, were huddled together, pulling beach towels around their shoulders for warmth. When they reached the front porch, Derek dropped the bags with a heavy thud. He rubbed his hands together, blowing on them for warmth, and reached into his pocket for his keys. He approached the massive oak door, expecting the familiar click and turn that had welcomed him home for 40 years. But the key didn't go in. He tried again, harder this time, scratching the brass plate. He frowned, bending down to look, and that was when he saw it. The lock wasn't just changed, it was gone. In its place was the sleek black biometric panel Mac had installed, a smooth plate of glass and steel that had no keyhole, no keypad, and no way in for a man whose fingerprints were not in the system. "What is wrong with it?" Vanessa snapped, shivering behind him. "Open the door. Derek." "It is freezing." "It is not working," Derek said, his voice rising in panic. "There is no hole. There is no keyhole." He pounded on the door with his fist. "Open up, Dad. It is us. Open the goddamn door." The sound of his fist against the solid wood was dull and heavy. There was no answer. The house was a tomb. Vanessa pushed past him. "Let me do it," she hissed. "You are useless." She grabbed the handle and rattled it, but it was locked tight, bolstered by the deadbolts Mac had installed deep into the frame. She stepped back and looked at the house, really looked at it for the first time since they had arrived. Her eyes drifted to the right, to the large bay window of the living room. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Derek," she shrieked. "Look at the window." Derek turned and saw what she saw. The beautiful floor-to-ceiling glass panes were gone, covered by sheets of raw, unpainted plywood nailed directly into the frame. It looked like a house preparing for a hurricane. It looked abandoned. "What is happening?" Derek yelled, spinning in a circle. "Why is everything boarded up?" And then the wind gusted, blowing the snow across the front lawn to reveal a small red sign planted firmly in the frozen earth. It was not a subtle sign. It read, "Sold." Above it, a writer strip read, "Sold to cash buyer." Derek stopped moving. He stared at the sign, blinking as if trying to clear a hallucination. He walked toward it, his steps slow and heavy, and touched the plastic. "Sold," he whispered, his voice cracking. He sold it. He actually sold it. "You are lying," Vanessa screamed, running to the sign and kicking it. "He can't sell it. It's our house. It's in the trust." "He did," Derek said, the realization crashing down on him like a tidal wave. "That is why the card stopped working. That is why he didn't answer. He liquidated the estate." The children began to cry louder, sensing the terror radiating from their parents. Derek ran back to the door, throwing his entire body weight against it. He clawed at the biometric scanner until his fingernails broke. "Dad," he roared, a primal sound of rage and grief. "You open this door right now. I am your son. I live here." Desperate, he grabbed a heavy ceramic planter from the porch. One Elizabeth had potted with mums, and heaved it through the air. It smashed against the plywood covering the living room window. The wood splintered, but held. The noise, trigger, however, was instantaneous. The commercial-grade alarm system Mac had installed erupted from the eaves. A piercing, deafening siren designed to disorient and terrify. Strobe lights mounted under the gutters began to flash, turning the gray morning into a strobe-lit nightmare of blue and white. Derek didn't stop. He was in a frenzy. He picked up a jagged shard of the ceramic planter and started hacking violently at the plywood, screaming obscenities. Screaming my name, he managed to open a small gap in the wood, jamming his fingers into the splintered hole, blood running down his hand. He didn't seem to feel it. He truly believed that if he could just breach the perimeter, the laws of property rights would bend around him. But the second element of the security protocol had already engaged. The monitoring company dispatched the police with a Priority 1 code, burglary in progress. 2 officers jumped out of the cruiser before it had fully stopped. One of them was Officer Davis, a man who didn't know Derek and didn't care about his pedigree. "Drop the weapon," Officer Davis shouted, leveling his service weapon at my son. "Get on the ground, now!" Derek froze, the ceramic shard still clutched in his bleeding hand. "It is my house!" Derek yelled, taking a foolish step toward the officers. "I live here. My dad is inside." "Stop moving," Officer Davis roared. "Drop the object or you will be tased." Derek dropped the shard, shattering it on the driveway. "I am suing you," he shouted as Officer Davis slammed him onto the hood of the cruiser. "Do you know who my father is?" It was the refrain of his life, but it held no currency here. The handcuffs clicked, a sharp metallic sound that cut through the wail of the alarm. Vanessa stood on the curb, shielding the children, watching as her husband was shoved into the back of a squad car. She looked at the house, then at her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed my number. I watched my screen light up with her name, Vanessa Sterling. I pressed the button to send it to voicemail. I wasn't ready to talk. I wanted them to sit in the cold a little longer. I wanted the reality of the situation to settle into their bones like the frost on the ground. The police car pulled away, taking my son to the precinct. The fortress was secure. The fluorescent lights of the second precinct hummed with a headache-inducing buzz that seemed to vibrate in my teeth. The air smelled of stale coffee, industrial floor cleaner, and the sharp, sour tang of human desperation. I walked through the double doors, my cane tapping a steady, authoritative rhythm on the scuffed linoleum. Walter Harrison walked beside me, his briefcase held like a shield, his face set in a mask of professional indifference. We were not there as worried parents coming to bail out a wayward child. We were there as the plaintiffs confirming the destruction of a relationship. I saw them immediately. Derek was handcuffed to a metal bench in the processing area, a place reserved for drunks and petty thieves. He looked small. The arrogance that usually puffed out his chest and made him walk with a swagger was gone, replaced by the slumped, caved-in posture of a man who had been stripped of his dignity along with his belt and shoelaces. His expensive linen shirt, bought for a tropical paradise, was stained with grease from the police cruiser's hood and dark patches of sweat. He looked up when he heard the distinctive click of my cane. His eyes widened, red-rimmed and frantic. For a split second, a wave of relief washed over his face. He thought the cavalry had arrived. He thought Daddy was here to write a check, yell at Sergeant O'Malley, and make the bad men go away. "Dad," he croaked, standing up as far as the short chain would allow. "Thank God. You have to tell them. Tell them this is insane. Tell them I live there. Tell them it's all a misunderstanding." I stopped 5 feet away from him. I did not step into his personal space. I stood just outside the reach of his desperation, a deliberate distance that felt like an ocean. I looked at the officer at the desk, Sergeant O'Malley, a man I knew from the Rotary Club. "Sergeant," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the room. "I am Arnold Sterling. I am the former owner of the property at 42 Oak Lane. I am here to confirm that the individual in custody has no legal claim to the residence. He does not hold a lease. He does not hold a title. He was, in fact, trespassing on private property that he has been explicitly barred from. Derek's jaw dropped. The relief on his face curdled into a look of absolute betrayal. The look of a child who has just realized the monster in the closet is real. "What are you saying?" he whispered. "I am your son. I have lived there for 5 years." I looked at him, really looked at him, and I didn't see the boy I had taught to ride a bike. I saw the man who had pawned my wedding ring for pocket money. "You are a 42-year-old man who broke into a house he does not own," I said, my voice as cold as the winter wind outside. "That makes you a criminal, Derek, not a son. You vacated the premises of your own accord. You abandoned your residency, and I sold the building." Vanessa was sitting on a plastic chair in the waiting area, huddled under a thin blanket. The children asleep in a pile of coats on the floor next to her. She looked ragged, her makeup smeared, her hair a bird's nest of tangles. She jumped up when she heard my voice, rushing the barrier like a cornered animal. "You sick old bastard," she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at me. "You set us up. You sold the house while we were in the air. You ruined everything. You are going to pay for this." I turned to her slowly. "I liquidated an asset, Vanessa," I said calmly. "Just like you liquidated my wife's jewelry. The difference is I own the house. You did not own the pearls. You did not own the sapphire brooch. And you certainly did not own my wedding ring." She froze, the blood draining from her face as she realized the secret economy she had built on my grief was exposed. "I have the receipts," I said, tapping the breast pocket of my coat. "But I am not pressing those charges today. Today, I am simply returning your property." I nodded to the entrance. Mac pushed the double doors open with his shoulder, wheeling in a hand truck stacked high with brown cardboard boxes, taped shut with aggressive amounts of gray duct tape. He tipped the dolly back and let the boxes slide onto the floor with a heavy thud. "This is your life," I said. "Your clothes, your shoes, your electronics. Nothing was left behind. Consider this, the final distribution of the Sterling estate." Walter stepped forward and placed a document on top of the stack. "This is a restraining order," he said professionally. "It bars you from coming within 500 feet of Mr. Sterling or his new residence." I turned my back on them as Derek wept and Vanessa shrieked, walking out into the cold night. I thought it was over, but I had underestimated Vanessa's greed. 3 weeks later, a process server found me at the Ritz-Carlton. I opened the envelope to find a lawsuit. Emergency motion for temporary guardianship and conservatorship. Plaintiff, Derek Sterling. They were claiming I had suffered a catastrophic cognitive decline, citing the below-market sale of the house as evidence of dementia. They wanted to annul the sale and seize control of my assets. It was a Hail Mary pass thrown by a desperate woman. The hearing was scheduled for 2 days later. I walked into the probate court wearing my best charcoal suit, walking upright without my cane. Derek and Vanessa were already there, trying to look the part of a concerned, grieving family. Their lawyer, Donovan, began his opening statement with theatrical pity. "Your Honor, no rational man burns $600,000 of equity overnight. That is the action of a man whose mind has been corrupted by dementia. We are asking the court to intervene to protect Mr. Sterling from himself. It was a logical narrative, provided you didn't know the context. When it was our turn, Walter Harrison didn't make a speech. He simply said, 'We prefer to respond with exhibits.' He plugged a flash drive into the court system. The monitor flickered to life, showing the black and white footage of them abandoning me on Thanksgiving morning. The courtroom heard the insults. They heard Vanessa call my home a place of failure. Then, Walter played the voicemail of Vanessa screaming threats. Finally, he dumped the contents of the orange Nike shoebox onto the defense table. I would like to enter into evidence 53 separate transaction slips from Quick Cash Pawn, Walter announced. He handed a specific receipt to Judge Reynolds. Item 3, a men's gold wedding band, inscribed Forever A&E, pawned by Derek Sterling for $300 on November 22nd. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. Judge Reynolds looked at the receipt, then at my bare hand, and finally at Derek. Her eyes were cold. "Mr. Sterling," she addressed Derek directly. "Did you pawn your father's wedding ring?" Derek stood up, shaking. "It was a temporary loan. We needed liquidity." "Liquidity?" the judge repeated, the word dripping with disdain. "You sold your father's wedding ring for $300 while living rent-free in his home, and now you ask for control over his assets?" She turned to me. "Mr. Sterling, why did you sell your house?" I stood up and buttoned my jacket. "Your Honor, I did not sell a home. I liquidated a liability. I discovered I was harboring thieves who were financing a lifestyle they could not afford by selling my past. Selling the house was the only way to evict them permanently. And frankly, after finding my wedding ring replaced by a hardware store washer, I could no longer sleep under that roof. The house was contaminated." Judge Reynolds nodded slowly. She didn't need to hear more. "Mr. Donovan, I suggest you advise your clients to be very quiet." She banged her gavel. "This court finds no evidence of incompetence. The motion for guardianship is denied. Furthermore, based on the evidence presented regarding the pawned items, I am forwarding the transcript of this hearing and all exhibits to the district attorney's office for review regarding potential criminal charges for elder abuse and grand larceny." Vanessa gasped, clutching Derek's arm. They had come for my money, and they were leaving with a criminal investigation. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said softly to me, "you are free to go. And may I say, I am sorry for your loss." She wasn't talking about my wife. "Thank you, Your Honor," I said. I walked out of the courtroom, leaving the ruins of my family behind me, the smell of victory filling the air. Walter Harrison and I walked toward the elevator, leaving the ruins of my family behind us on the courtroom floor. But there was one last loose end to tie up. Derek caught up to us in the marble lobby of the courthouse, his breathing ragged and desperate, looking like a man who had just survived a firing squad, only to realize he was standing in a minefield. He grabbed my sleeve, his fingers digging into the fabric of the charcoal suit he had once admired. "Dad, wait," he gasped, ignoring Vanessa, who was lagging behind trying to fix her mascara. "I know you are angry. I know the house is gone. But listen to me. I still have my job. I am the CEO of Sterling Logistics. I have a salary. I have a bonus coming in January. I can get an apartment. I can pay you back for the jewelry. Just give me time." I stopped and turned to face him, creating a bubble of silence around us in the crowded lobby. He was clinging to his title like a life raft in a hurricane, truly believing that his corporate status was separate from his character. "You do not have a salary, Derek," I said, my voice flat. "And you do not have a bonus." He looked at me, a nervous smile flickering on his face. "What do you mean?" "Of course I do. I run the company. You retired 5 years ago." "I retired from the daily operations." I corrected him. "I did not retire from ownership. I retained 51% of the voting stock. And as the chairman of the board, I convened an emergency meeting this morning at 8 a.m. while you were sitting at the defendant's table." Walter stepped forward, reaching into his inner jacket pocket to pull out a single white envelope. He handed it to Derek. "Termination for cause," Derek whispered, reading the bold text as his knees buckled. "Embezzlement. While you were in Hawaii enjoying the beach on my credit card, I had the forensic accountants go through the books. I said, it did not take them long to find it. $200,000. Derek, over 18 months. Fake invoices from shell vendors paid to companies registered in Vanessa's maiden name. You were stealing from the company that put food on your table to pay for gambling debts and handbags." I leaned in close. "You are walking out of here with nothing but the suit on your back, and even that I paid for. If you ever come near me or my property again, I will hand that forensic audit to the FBI." I turned and walked through the revolving doors into the bright winter sunlight, leaving him standing in the lobby holding his termination letter like a death certificate. It had been exactly 30 days since the sale of the house closed. December had settled over the city with a brutal gray permanence, turning the streets into wind tunnels of biting cold. I was no longer watching the weather from a drafty Victorian estate. I was watching it from the floor-to-ceiling thermal windows of a penthouse apartment in the city center. I had rented it with a fraction of the proceeds from the house sale. It was modern, warm, and remarkably quiet. I was setting the table for dinner, having invited Mac and Walter for a make-up Thanksgiving. When the concierge buzzer rang, I walked to the wall panel and saw them on the video screen. Derek and Vanessa looked like ghosts. Derek was wearing a parka that was 2 sizes too small, likely bought from a thrift store, and his face was gaunt. Vanessa was unrecognizable, her roots grown out, clutching a synthetic coat around her throat. I pressed the talk button. "Yes," I said. They jumped, staring into the camera lens. "Dad," Derek said. His voice cracked and dry. "The concierge said you live here. We need to talk. Please, it is Christmas next week. We have nothing to talk about." "Derek," I said. "We have nowhere to go." Vanessa interrupted, pushing her face closer to the camera, her eyes wild. "We are living in a motel by the highway. The kids are sick. Toby has a fever. We don't have health insurance anymore because Derek lost his job. We are eating noodles from a gas station. Just let us in. Just give us a check. Anything." I looked at the children huddled on a bench in the lobby background. I felt a pang of sorrow for them, but I knew that opening that door would only fund their parents' addiction to entitlement. "I am not cruel, Vanessa," I said. "Cruelty is stealing a grandmother's necklace to pay for a poolside cabana. Cruelty is leaving an old man alone on a holiday. Dad, please," Derek begged, tears streaming down his face. "I will do anything. I will work in the mailroom. I will sweep floors. Just help us get back on our feet." "I have something to show you," I said. I reached for a manila envelope I had kept on the console table for this exact moment. I held it up to the camera lens. "Do you see the date on this contract? Derek, November 22nd. The day before Thanksgiving. I bought this house on November 22nd. 5 bedrooms, granite kitchen, a playroom for the kids. It cost $600,000. It was supposed to be a surprise. I was going to put the keys in a box and give them to you at Thanksgiving dinner. It was going to be yours, paid for, free and clear." Vanessa let out a sound that was half gasp, half scream. But then I woke up to an empty house. I continued. "So I called the builder and I canceled the contract. I lost the deposit, but it was worth it." Derek slid down the wall of the lobby until he was crouching on the floor, weeping uncontrollably. "You traded a lifetime of security for 5 days in Hawaii," I said, my voice low and final. "That is the worst business deal I have ever seen. And you made it all by yourself." "No," Vanessa whispered. "We can still take the house. You can buy it again. It is sold. I lead. Just like the estate. Just like my wedding ring. It is gone. Goodbye, Son." I pressed the button, and the screen went black. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle into my bones. Then I turned away from the door and walked back into the dining room where Mac and Walter were waiting. The turkey was carved, and the wine was breathing. "Everything all right, Arnold?" Mac asked. "Everything is perfect, Mac," I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. I lifted my glass. "To family," Walter said, hesitating slightly. I smiled at the 2 men who had stood by me when my own blood had run. "To the family we choose," I corrected him. We clinked glasses, the crystal ringing out with a pure, clear note. Outside, the winter wind howled, but inside, it was finally warm.